The alarm clock screamed at 5:30 a.m., just like it had every morning for the past 5 years. Jake rolled out of bed, his feet hitting the cold wooden floor of his mountain cabin. Outside, the Colorado wilderness stretched as far as the eye could see. Snow-capped peaks touched the sky, and the air was so clean it almost hurt to breathe. Most people would call this paradise. Jake called it home, but more than that, he called it his escape. The cabin sat 20 miles from the nearest neighbor, 30 miles from the small town of Cedar Falls. It was perfect for a man who didn't want to be found, didn't want to be bothered, and definitely didn't want to explain himself to anyone. Jake pulled on his worn flannel shirt and heavy work boots. His reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror showed a man who looked older than his 45 years. Dark hair streaked with gray, a beard that had seen better days, and eyes that seemed to carry the weight of the world. Those eyes had once been full of laughter and hope. Now they just looked tired. He made his coffee the same way he had for 5 years. Black, strong, and in the same chipped blue mug that had somehow survived when everything else in his life had fallen apart. The first sip burned his tongue, but it helped wake him up. He stood at the kitchen window, watching the sun paint the mountains gold and orange. This used to be their dream home. He and Linda had saved for 10 years to buy this piece of land. They were going to raise kids here, teach them to fish in the stream, show them how to track deer, and tell them stories around the campfire. They had it all planned out, but life had other plans. The accident happened on a Tuesday. Jake remembered that because Linda always went grocery shopping on Tuesdays. She was driving back from town when a drunk driver ran a red light. The police said she died instantly, that she didn't suffer. Jake supposed that was meant to make him feel better. It didn't. After the funeral, everyone expected him to sell the cabin and move back to the city. His friends said he needed to be around people. That isolation wasn't healthy. His family worried about him living alone in the mountains. But Jake had different ideas. He sold his construction business, packed up his tools, and disappeared into the wilderness. For the first year, people came to check on him. Friends drove the long, winding road to his cabin, worried about his mental state. His sister called every week, begging him to come stay with her family in Denver. But Jake learned to hide when he heard cars coming up the mountain road. He learned to let the phone ring until it stopped. Eventually, they gave up. Or maybe they just got tired of trying to save someone who didn't want to be saved. Now, Jake's days followed a routine that never changed. He woke up before dawn, made his coffee, and checked the weather. If it looked like a good day for hiking, he'd pack his gear and head into the backcountry. He knew every trail within 50 miles, every hidden lake, every secret spot where the best fishing could be found. Jake worked as a mountain guide when he needed money, which wasn't often. He lived simply, grew his own vegetables in the summer, and hunted when the seasons allowed. City folks paid good money for someone to show them the real wilderness experience. And Jake knew these mountains better than most people knew their own neighborhoods. He preferred the difficult clients, the ones who complained about the cold, whined about the hiking, and generally made his job harder. They reminded him why he chose to live alone. Give him an angry businessman over a chatty family any day. The easy clients were worse. The ones who tried to make conversation, who asked about his life, who seemed genuinely interested in getting to know him. Those were the ones that made his chest tight and his hands shake. Because for just a moment, they made him remember what it felt like to connect with another human being. Most days, Jake could go without speaking to another person. He talked to the animals sometimes, the family of deer that came to drink from. The stream behind his cabin had heard more of his thoughts than any human in years. There was a red-tailed hawk that seemed to follow him on his hikes, and Jake found himself having one-sided conversations with the bird about the weather, the changing seasons, and sometimes about Linda. The hawk was a good listener. It never tried to give advice or tell him he needed to move on or find closure, or any of the other things people had said to him in those first few months. Jake's weekly trips to Cedar Falls were necessary but painful. He needed supplies. And sometimes his old truck needed gas or repairs. The town was small enough that everyone knew everyone, which meant they all knew his story. Most people had learned to leave him alone, but there were always a few who thought they could fix him with small talk or invitations to church dinners. He'd perfected the art of getting in and out of town as quickly as possible. Hardware store for any tools or materials he needed. Grocery store for the basics he couldn't grow or hunt himself. Gas station to fill up the truck. Maybe the post office if he was expecting equipment deliveries. Never more than an hour in town. And never any unnecessary conversations. The people in Cedar Falls had their opinions about the hermit who lived up in the mountains. Some thought he was crazy, living alone like that. Others felt sorry for him, the poor widower who couldn't handle his grief. A few admired him, calling him a real mountain man who'd found a way to live free from society's demands. Jake didn't care what they thought. Their opinions were as meaningless to him as their invitations and their attempts at friendship. He'd learned that people eventually got bored with trying to help someone who didn't want help. They'd move on to other projects. Other people to save, other causes to champion. Winter was Jake's favorite season. The snow made the mountain roads impassable for weeks at a time, which meant no unexpected visitors. No hikers getting lost and needing rescue. No hunting parties asking him to guide them to the best spots. Just him, the cabin, and the endless white silence of the mountains. He'd chop wood until his back ached, read books by the firelight, and sometimes play the guitar Linda had given him for their 5th anniversary. He wasn't very good at it, but the music filled the silence that sometimes became too heavy to bear. On the worst days, when the loneliness felt like a physical weight on his chest, Jake would remind himself why he'd chosen this life. People left. People died. People disappointed you and broke your heart and moved on to other things. But the mountains never changed. The wilderness didn't make promises it couldn't keep. The silence didn't lie to you or tell you everything would be okay when it wouldn't. Here, Jake was safe from all of that. Safe from hope, safe from disappointment, and safe from the kind of pain that had nearly destroyed him 5 years ago. He'd built walls around his heart as solid as the mountains themselves, and he planned to keep them that way. But sometimes, late at night when the wind howled through the pine trees, Jake wondered if this was really living or just a very slow way of dying. He'd push that thought away as soon as it came, because wondering about such things was dangerous. It meant some small part of him still cared about the answer, and caring about anything was a risk Jake wasn't willing to take. Tuesday morning came with dark clouds hanging over the mountains. Jake could smell rain in the air as he loaded his old pickup truck with empty water jugs and a shopping list that hadn't changed much in 5 years. Beans, rice, coffee, basic. Supplies? Nothing fancy, nothing that would keep him in town longer than necessary. The drive down the mountain always made him nervous. 20 miles of winding road that turned into a muddy mess when it rained. More than once he'd been stuck up there for weeks when the weather turned bad. Part of him didn't mind being cut off from the world, but running out of coffee was something even a mountain hermit couldn't handle. Cedar Falls looked the same as always. One main street with a handful of shops, a small grocery store, and Maggie's diner where all the local news got shared over coffee and pie. Jake usually avoided the diner completely. Too many people, too much chatter, too many folks who thought they knew what was best for him. But today his truck was making a strange noise, and Bill's auto repair was right next to the diner. Jake pulled in and popped the hood, hoping it was something simple. The last thing he needed was to be stuck in town waiting for parts. Bill walked over, wiping his hands on a greasy rag. He was one of the few people in town who didn't try to psychoanalyze Jake or invite him to family barbecues. Just business, which Jake appreciated. "Sounds like your belt's about to give out," Bill said after listening to the engine for a minute. "I've got one in stock. Give me 20 minutes. 20 minutes. Jake glanced at the diner and decided he could handle a cup of coffee. Maybe sit in the corner booth, mind his own business, and wait for his truck to be ready. He'd done it before. When necessary, the bell above the diner door announced his arrival with a cheerful jingle that made him want to turn around and leave. But Maggie waved from behind the counter, and Jake knew there was no escape now. She'd already seen him. "Jake, haven't seen you in months. Coffee?" He nodded and slid into the corner booth, the one with the torn vinyl seat that nobody else wanted. Perfect for someone who didn't want company. Maggie brought him coffee in a white ceramic mug that was nothing like his favorite blue one at home, but the coffee was hot and strong. Through the window, he could see Bill working on his truck. The man moved slowly but carefully, the way good mechanics do. Jake was halfway through his coffee when raised voices outside caught his attention. A fancy black car had pulled up near the diner, the kind city people drove when they wanted everyone to know they had money. A man and woman in expensive clothes were standing next to it, talking loudly to a woman with a clipboard and a tired expression. Jake tried to ignore them. Other people's problems weren't his concern, but the voices got louder, and despite himself, he found his attention drawn to the scene unfolding outside. That's when he saw them, 2 kids, maybe 7 or 8 years old, sitting on the bench outside the diner. They looked exactly alike, down to their sandy brown hair and big green eyes. Twins. They each had a small backpack clutched in their arms, and they sat so close together they might as well have been attached. The kids weren't saying anything, just watching the adults argue about them like they were pieces of furniture being negotiated over. Jake could see the fear in their eyes, the way they held on to each other like they were afraid of being separated. "This is not what we agreed to," the fancy woman was saying, her voice carrying through the diner window. "We were told they were well-behaved children, not traumatized kids who won't even speak." The man next to her nodded, straightening his expensive tie. "We have our own children to think about. We can't take on this kind of responsibility." The woman with the clipboard, who Jake figured must be some kind of social worker, looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. She kept glancing at the twins, then back at the couple, clearly trying to find a solution that didn't exist. "Please just give them a chance," the social worker said. "They've been through a lot. Their grandmother was the only family they had left, and she passed away 3 weeks ago. They just need time to adjust." But the fancy couple was already backing away. Jake watched through the window as they got in their black car and drove off, leaving the social worker standing there with 2 kids who had nowhere to go. Jake found himself leaning closer to the window, studying the twins. The little girl had her arm around her brother, whispering something in his ear. The boy just stared at the ground, his small shoulders shaking like he was trying not to cry. The social worker made a phone call, pacing back and forth while she talked. Jake couldn't hear what she was saying, but her body language told the whole story. Frustrated gestures, shaking her head, the way she kept looking at the kids like she was running out of options. After the call ended, she sat down next to the twins and said something that made them both look up. Whatever she told them, it wasn't good news. The little girl's face crumpled, and she buried her face in her brother's shoulder. The boy just stared straight ahead with the kind of empty expression Jake recognized from his own mirror. "Sad situation," Maggie said, refilling Jake's coffee cup. He hadn't noticed her approach. "What's going on?" Jake asked before he could stop himself. Maggie sighed and sat down across from him, something she'd never done before. "Those are the Thompson twins. Their grandma raised them after their parents died in a car crash when they were babies. Sweet old lady used to bring them in here for ice cream every Sunday." Jake felt something twist in his chest. What happened to her? Heart attack. Found her in her garden 3 weeks ago. Poor kids were at school when it happened. Maggie shook her head. "That's Mrs. Rodriguez, the social worker. She's been trying to find them a home, but it's not easy. Most folks want babies, not school-age kids. And twins are twice the responsibility." Through the window, Jake watched Mrs. Rodriguez make another phone call. The conversation seemed more heated this time, lots of head shaking and frustrated gestures. When she hung up, she sat back down with the kids and talked to them for a long time. "What happens if she can't find them a home?" Jake asked. "Emergency foster care, I suppose. Might have to split them up temporarily." Maggie's voice was sad. Those 2 have never been apart a day in their lives. Their grandma used to say they had their own language when they were little. Jake watched the little girl help her brother wipe his eyes with a tissue from her backpack. There was something fierce about the way she protected him. something that reminded Jake of the mama bears he'd seen in the mountains defending their cubs. Mrs. Rodriguez made a third phone call, and this one was clearly not going well. Jake could see her getting more agitated, walking further away from the kids so they couldn't hear whatever bad news she was getting. "I need to get back to work," Maggie said, standing up. "But those kids need a miracle. They've lost everyone they ever loved, and now they might lose each other too." She walked away, leaving Jake alone with his coffee and his thoughts. He tried to look away from the window, tried to mind his own business like he always did. But something about those two kids sitting on that bench wouldn't let him ignore them. The little girl was singing softly to her brother now, some song Jake couldn't hear through the glass. The boy had stopped crying and was leaning against her, finding comfort in his sister's voice. They looked so small sitting there, so vulnerable and alone. Jake had spent 5 years avoiding exactly this kind of situation. He'd built his whole life around not caring about other people's problems, not getting involved, not letting anyone else's pain become his responsibility. It was safer that way, cleaner, but watching those two kids holding on to each other like they were all they had left in the world, Jake felt something crack open inside his chest. Something he'd kept locked away for 5 years was stirring to life, and it scared him more than any mountain storm ever had. Mrs. Rodriguez finished her call and walked back to the bench. Whatever she told the kids made them both look up with expressions of pure terror. The little girl grabbed her brother's hand and shook her head, clearly upset about whatever plan was being discussed. That's when Jake heard the words that would change everything. "I'm sorry, sweethearts," Mrs. Rodriguez was saying, her voice carrying through the open diner door. "I know you want to stay together, but I might have to place you in different homes temporarily. Just until I can find a family willing to take both of you." The little girl's voice was small but determined. "We promised Grandma we'd take care of each other. I know, honey. But sometimes we have to do things we don't want to do." Jake felt his hands clench into fists. He knew that feeling, that helpless anger when life took away everything you cared about and expected you to just accept it. But these kids were 8 years old. They shouldn't have to learn that lesson yet, without really thinking about what he was doing. Jake stood up and walked toward the door. His heart was pounding, and his mouth felt dry, but something was pulling him forward. Something stronger than his fear, stronger than his need to stay safe and uninvolved. He was about to do something that would change his life forever, and for the first time in 5 years, Jake didn't try to stop himself. Jake's legs felt like lead as he walked toward the diner door. Every step seemed to echo in his ears, drowning out the reasonable voice in his head that was screaming at him to turn around and walk away. This wasn't his problem. These weren't his kids. He didn't get involved in other people's lives, but his feet kept moving. The bell above the door jingled as he stepped outside, and suddenly all eyes were on him. Mrs. Rodriguez looked up from where she was kneeling beside the twins, clearly surprised to see the mountain hermit approaching. The kids stared at him with those big green eyes, taking in his worn flannel shirt, his weathered face, and his obvious discomfort at being the center of attention. Jake stopped about 10 feet away, his heart hammering so hard he was sure everyone could hear it. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. What was he supposed to say? He hadn't thought this through. He never thought anything through anymore. For 5 years he'd lived on instinct and routine, avoiding situations that required planning or decision-making. "Can I help you?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked. She had the tired voice of someone who'd been dealing with difficult situations all day and wasn't expecting any good news. Jake cleared his throat. "I heard what happened to their grandmother. I'm sorry for your loss," he said, looking directly at the twins. The little girl lifted her chin slightly, like she was trying to be brave. The boy just stared at his shoes. "Thank you," Mrs. Rodriguez said carefully. "Did you know Mrs. Thompson?" "No, but—" Jake struggled for words. He wasn't good at explaining himself under the best circumstances, and this definitely wasn't that. "I heard you might have to split them up." The social worker's expression softened slightly. "It's not what I want to do, but I'm running out of options. I've called every family on my list, and nobody's willing to take twins. Especially not twins who've been through this kind of trauma. Jake looked at the kids again. The little girl had her arm protectively around her brother's shoulders, and something about that gesture hit him like a punch to the gut. It reminded him of Linda, the way she used to comfort him when work got stressful or when his dad was in the hospital. What if someone wanted them? Both of them? The words came out before Jake could stop them. Mrs. Rodriguez blinked. Well, that would be wonderful, but like I said, I've exhausted my list of approved families. The process for new applicants takes months, and these children need placement now. How much? Jake asked. The question hung in the air like smoke. Mrs. Rodriguez stared at him, clearly confused. The twins looked between the adults, trying to understand what was happening. I'm sorry, what? Mrs. Rodriguez said. Jake felt his face burning red, but he pressed on. How much would it cost to take care of them? Sir, I think there's been a misunderstanding. You can't just buy children. That's not how adoption works. The words hit Jake like cold water. Of course, that's not how it worked. What was wrong with him? He'd spent so long away from people that he'd forgotten how to have normal conversations about normal things. Except this wasn't normal. Nothing about this was normal. That's not what I meant, he said quickly, aware that several people from inside the diner had come to the windows to watch the show. I meant ... For someone to adopt them? Mrs. Rodriguez studied his face carefully. Are you saying you're interested in adoption? Because that's a very serious commitment and there's a lengthy process involved. Background checks, home studies, parenting classes, ... Stop, I'll buy those twins. The words exploded out of Jake before he could think about them. They came from some deep, desperate place inside him that he didn't even know existed anymore. Every head turned to stare at him, and he realized how awful that sounded. I mean, he started again, his voice shaking. I want to adopt them, both of them. I don't want them to be separated. Mrs. Rodriguez stood up slowly, her expression shifting from confusion to professional concern. Sir, I'm going to need to ask you some questions. Starting with your name, Jake Morrison. I live up on Pine Ridge Road. The Mountain Man, one of the diner patrons, whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. Jake felt his shoulders tense. He hated that nickname, hated being talked about like some kind of local legend or curiosity. Mr. Morrison, Mrs. Rodriguez said carefully, adoption is a huge responsibility. These children have special needs due to their recent trauma. They need stability, consistency, and lots of emotional support. Do you have experience with children? Jake looked down at the twins. The little girl was staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Curiosity, maybe, or hope. The boy was still looking at his shoes, but Jake could see he was listening to every word. No, Jake said honestly. But I know what it's like to lose someone you love, and I know what it's like to be alone. Something in his voice must have reached the little girl, because she tilted her head and really looked at him for the first time. Are you sad too? She asked in a voice barely above a whisper. The question hit Jake harder than he'd expected. He knelt down so he was at eye level with the twins, ignoring the way his knees protested against the concrete. Yeah, he said simply. I'm sad too. Do you live by yourself? The boy asked, speaking for the first time. His voice was soft and careful, like he was afraid of saying the wrong thing. I do, in a cabin up in the mountains. It's really quiet there. Quiet sounds nice, the little girl said. People are always trying to tell us things will be okay, but they don't know that. Grandma always said it was okay to be sad when sad things happen. Jake felt something crack open in his chest. Your grandma sounds like she was a smart lady. She was the smartest, the boy said, finally looking up. She taught us how to make cookies and how to tie our shoes and how to remember our address in case we got lost. Did she teach you how to fish? Jake asked. Both kids shook their heads. Well, there's a stream that runs right behind my house, and it's full of trout. If you came to live with me, I could teach you. Mr. Morrison, Mrs. Rodriguez interrupted. I appreciate your offer, but this isn't something that can be decided in a parking lot. There's a process, and it exists to protect children. Jake stood up, his knees protesting. Then tell me what I need to do. First, you'd need to complete an application. Then there would be a background check, financial evaluation, home study. How long does all that take? Several months, usually. And that's if everything goes smoothly. Jake looked at the twins again. The little girl was holding her brother's hand now, and they both looked like they were trying not to cry. What happens to them while we're waiting for all that paperwork? Emergency foster care. And given the circumstances, they might need to be placed separately. No, the word came out sharper than Jake intended. That's not happening, Mrs. Rodriguez sighed. Mr. Morrison, I understand your concern, but I have to work within the system. I can't just hand over 2 children to someone I've never met. Then, meet me, Jake said. Come up to my place, see how I live. Ask me whatever questions you need to ask, but don't split them up. Please. The twins were watching this conversation like a tennis match, their heads turning back and forth between the adults who were deciding their fate. Jake could see the fear in their eyes, the way they clutched each other's hands. What's your name? Jake asked the little girl. Riley, she said. And this is my brother, Tyler. Riley and Tyler, Jake repeated. Those are good names. Our grandma picked them, Tyler said. She said Riley means brave and Tyler means strong. She was right, Jake said. You are brave and strong, both of you. Mrs. Rodriguez was watching this exchange with a thoughtful expression. Mr. Morrison, if I were to consider your request, I'd need some immediate assurances. Do you have a stable income? A safe home? Any criminal history I should know about? I work as a mountain guide. I own my cabin outright, no mortgage. And the only law I've ever broken is probably the speed limit coming down the mountain. References? Jake. Thought about it. Bill at the auto shop. Maggie from the diner. Sheriff Williams has known me for 20 years. Dr. Peterson in town delivered me when I was born. Family support? That was harder. My sister lives in Denver. We don't talk much, but she's good people. My parents are gone. Mrs. Rodriguez was? Quiet for a long moment, studying his face. Jake could practically see her weighing options, trying to figure out if this crazy mountain man was a solution or just another problem. I need time to think about this, she finally said. And I need to make some calls. Can you give me until tomorrow? Where will they stay tonight? Jake asked. I'll figure something out. Riley tugged on Mrs. Rodriguez's sleeve. Can we go see? His house, just to look? The social worker looked down at her, then back at Jake. That's not really how this works, sweetie. Please? Tyler added. We just want to see where he lives. Jake could see Mrs. Rodriguez wavering. She looked tired, stressed, and probably running out of options. 2 kids staring up at her with hopeful faces couldn't be making her job any easier. 1 hour, she said finally. I'll follow you up there. We'll take a quick look around. And then I need to get these children somewhere safe for the night. Jake felt something lift in his chest for the first time in years. It wasn't much, but it was a start. You won't regret this, he said. Mrs. Rodriguez gave him a look that suggested she already was regretting it. The drive up the mountain felt like the longest 20 miles of Jake's life. In his rearview mirror, he could see Mrs. Rodriguez's white sedan following carefully behind him. The twins' faces pressed against the back windows as they watched the scenery change from small-town streets to winding forest roads. Jake's hands were sweating on the steering wheel. What had he been thinking? His cabin was built for one person who didn't care about appearances. There were tools scattered around, dirty dishes in the sink, and probably a layer of dust on everything. He hadn't had visitors in years, and it showed. The road got steeper as they climbed, switching back and forth through tall pine trees. Jake watched Mrs. Rodriguez's car slow down on the sharper turns and hoped she wouldn't change her mind about this whole crazy idea. City cars weren't meant for mountain roads, especially not roads that Jake had been too lazy to get properly paved when they finally reached his cabin. Jake parked and sat in his truck for a moment, looking at his home through a stranger's eyes. The log cabin was solid and well built, but it definitely looked like a place where a hermit lived. No flower boxes, no welcome mat, no signs that children had ever been welcome here. Mrs. Rodriguez got out of her car and helped the twins climb. Out of the back seat, Riley immediately ran to the wooden porch railing and peered over the edge, where the ground dropped away into a small valley. "Wow," she said, "you can see everything from up here." Tyler was more cautious, staying close to Mrs. Rodriguez as he looked around. His eyes were wide as he took in the tall trees, the mountains in the distance, and the complete silence that surrounded them. "It's so quiet," he whispered. Jake got out of his truck and walked over to them, suddenly aware of how his boots sounded loud on the wooden porch. "That's because we're the only people for miles. No traffic, no sirens, no neighbors playing loud music. What if someone gets hurt?" Riley asked, always the practical one. "I've got a radio for emergencies. And I know first aid pretty well, had to learn it for my guiding business." Mrs. Rodriguez was taking notes on her clipboard, writing down everything she saw. Jake tried not to let that make him nervous, but he felt like he was being graded on a test he hadn't studied for. "Let's see inside," she said. Jake opened the front door and stepped back to let them enter first. The cabin was bigger than it looked from outside, with a main room that served as living room and kitchen, a bedroom, and a small bathroom. Everything was made of wood, from the floors to the walls to the ceiling beams. Riley immediately went to the big stone fireplace and looked up the chimney. "Does this work?" "Every night in winter," Jake said. "It heats the whole place." Tyler was drawn to the bookshelf that covered one entire wall. He ran his finger along the spines, reading titles quietly to himself. "You have a lot of books. Winters are long up here. Books help pass the time?" Mrs. Rodriguez was opening cabinets, checking the refrigerator, and examining the bathroom. Jake knew what she was looking for. Safety hazards, signs of drinking or drug use, anything that might make this place unsuitable for children. Where would they sleep? She asked. Jake hadn't thought that far ahead. "I could set up beds in the main room. Or maybe build a loft. There's plenty of space." "Mr. Morrison, you're talking about major home modifications. That takes time and money. I've got both," Jake said. "And I'm good with my hands. Built most of this place myself." Riley was exploring the kitchen now, opening drawers and finding them full of basic tools and camping supplies. "Do you cook real food or just eat from cans?" "Both," Jake admitted. "I grow vegetables in summer, hunt when it's legal, catch fish from the stream, but I'm not much of a cook." "Grandma taught us how to make spaghetti and grilled cheese," Tyler said shyly. "We could help." Something about the way he said it, like he was offering a gift, made Jake's chest tight. "I'd like that." Mrs. Rodriguez finished her inspection and called Jake outside while the twins continued exploring. They stood on the porch, watching Riley show Tyler how to skip stones into the stream below. Double quotes, "Mr. Morrison, I'm going to be honest with you. This is highly irregular. I've never had someone volunteer for adoption after meeting the children for 5 minutes." "I know it seems crazy," Jake said. "Trust me, 6 hours ago I would have thought I was crazy too. These children have been through tremendous trauma. They're going to need therapy, patience, and probably some difficult conversations about grief and loss. Are you prepared for that?" Jake watched Tyler carefully place his feet exactly where his sister had stepped as they explored the stream bank. "I've had my own difficult conversations with grief and loss." "Maybe that's not such a bad thing. What about school?" "The nearest elementary school is 30 miles away. I'll drive them. Every day if I have to." "What about friends? Social activities?" "Children need to be around other children." Jake hadn't thought about that. He'd been avoiding other people for so long that he'd forgotten children were different. They needed things he'd spent years running away from. "I'll figure it out," he said. "Whatever they need." Mrs. Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, watching the twins. Riley had found a stick and was showing Tyler how to measure the depth of the water. "There's something else," she said finally. "Riley and Tyler have an uncle, their father's brother. He lives in California and travels a lot for work. When I first tried to contact him about the children, he said he couldn't take them because of his job." Jake felt his stomach drop. "And now?" "Now he's had time to think about it. He called me this morning and said he wants to reconsider. He's their blood relative, Mr. Morrison. If he decides he wants them, the courts will almost certainly award custody to him. Does he know them? Has he been part of their lives? According to their grandmother's notes, he visited maybe once a year. The children barely remember him, but that might not matter legally. Jake looked at Riley and Tyler, who were now building a small dam out of rocks and sticks. They looked so peaceful, so at home already. The thought of them being shipped off to live with a stranger who'd ignored them for years made him angry. How long do I have? He's flying in tomorrow to meet with me. If he formally requests custody, this whole conversation becomes academic. Jake felt like the ground was shifting under his feet. What can I do? Honestly, probably nothing. Blood. Relatives have priority, especially when the potential adoptive parent has no experience with children and lives in isolation. But they don't want to go live with some uncle they don't know. They want to stay together, and they want stability. Mr. Morrison, what children want isn't always the primary consideration in these cases. The law is designed to place them with. Family first? Riley's voice carried up from the stream. Tyler, look, I caught a frog. Her brother's laugh was the first real joy Jake had heard from either of them. It was a sound that belonged here, in this peaceful place. The thought of it being silenced by bureaucracy and legal technicalities made Jake's hands clench into fists. There has to be something, he said. Mrs. Rodriguez sighed. There is one thing. If you were to officially apply for adoption and begin the process, it might slow things down, show that the children have options. But Mr. Morrison, you need to understand that the process is designed to weed out people who aren't serious. There will be interviews, psychological evaluations, financial reviews. They'll want to know why a single man who's lived alone for years suddenly wants to adopt traumatized twins. What do I tell them? The truth, whatever that is. Jake looked at the twins again. Riley was now teaching Tyler how to identify different types of rocks, her voice patient and encouraging. They moved like a team, anticipating each other's needs, filling in each other's gaps. The truth is that I was dying up here, Jake said quietly. I didn't know it, but I was. And seeing those kids today, seeing how scared they were of being separated, it reminded me what it feels like to be alive. Mrs. Rodriguez studied his face. That's not a bad start. But you'll need more than that. You'll need references, a support system, proof that you can provide for their emotional and physical needs. Then that's what I'll do, Mr. Morrison. I have to ask. Are you sure you're ready for this? Once you start this process, those children are going to start hoping. If you change your mind, if you decide it's too hard, you'll be breaking their hearts all over again. Jake watched Tyler help his sister catch another frog, their heads bent together as they examined their discovery. I won't change my mind. How can you be so sure? Because I already tried living without them, Jake said. And I don't want to do that anymore. Mrs. Rodriguez made more notes on her clipboard. I'll need to take them back to town tonight. But if you're serious about this, I can get you the paperwork tomorrow. The application alone is 40 pages, and that's just the beginning. I'm serious. Riley came running up from the stream, her shoes soaked and her face bright with excitement. Can we come back tomorrow? There are so many cool things down there. Jake looked at Mrs. Rodriguez, who shrugged. We'll see, sweetheart. Mr. Jake has some paperwork to fill out first. Paperwork is boring, Tyler said, joining his sister on the porch, but this place isn't boring at all. No, Jake agreed. It's definitely not boring. As they prepared to leave, Riley stopped at the door and looked back into the cabin. It feels safe here, she said quietly. Jake didn't sleep much that night. He kept thinking about Riley and Tyler, wondering where they were staying, if they were scared. If they were together, Mrs. Rodriguez had promised to keep them in the same foster home temporarily, but Jake knew how quickly promises could be broken when the system got involved. By 5 a.m., he gave up on sleep and started making coffee. The cabin felt different now, emptier somehow. In just one afternoon, 2 8-year-old kids had changed the way his home felt. He could still see Riley's wet footprints on the porch from when she'd come up from the stream, still hear Tyler's quiet voice asking about the books. The 40-page adoption application sat on his kitchen table like a mountain he had to climb. Jake had filled out the basic information parts the night before, but the harder questions remained. Why do you want to adopt? What experience do you have with children? Describe your support system. How was he supposed to explain that he'd lived like a hermit for 5 years and suddenly wanted to become a father to 2 traumatized kids? It sounded crazy even to him. His phone rang at 8 a.m. sharp. Mrs. Rodriguez, right on time. The uncle is flying in this afternoon, she said without preamble. His name is David Chun. He's a software consultant, makes good money, and he's decided he wants custody of his brother's children. Jake felt his stomach sink. Has he talked to them? Not yet. I'm bringing Riley and Tyler to meet him at 2 o'clock. Jake, I need you to understand something. This man is their blood relative. He has a stable income, a nice house in Los Angeles, and no history with social services. On paper, he looks like the perfect guardian. And me? On paper, you look like a mountain hermit with no parenting experience who made an impulsive decision in a parking lot. Jake closed his eyes. What are my chances? If you'd asked me yesterday, I would have said 0. But something happened last night that might change things. What? Riley had a nightmare. She woke up crying and asking for her grandmother. When I tried to comfort her, she said she wanted to go back to the quiet place with the man who understands about being sad. She meant your cabin, Jake. Something warm spread through Jake's chest. What did you tell her? That I would do my best to make sure she and Tyler stayed together, no matter what. But Jake, you need to be prepared for the possibility that this doesn't work out. These kids have already lost everyone they've ever loved. I won't let them get attached to someone else who might disappear from their lives. I'm not going anywhere. Prove it. Get that application completed and back to me today. I've also scheduled your first home study for next week, assuming David Chun doesn't end this whole process this afternoon. After Mrs. Rodriguez hung up, Jake stared at the application again. The questions seemed even harder now, knowing he was competing against a successful relative with a normal life. He started with the easier parts. Employment history, financial information, medical records. Then he hit the essay questions and his pen stopped moving. Describe a difficult situation you've overcome and how it changed you. Jake thought about Linda's death, about the dark months that followed, about choosing isolation over healing. But how could he write about that without sounding like someone who runs away from problems? He was still staring at the blank page when a knock came at his door. Jake never got visitors, especially not at 10 in the morning on a Wednesday. He opened the door to find Sheriff Williams standing on his porch, hat in hand. Morning, Jake. Heard you had some excitement in town yesterday. Word traveled fast in a small town. Jake stepped aside to let the sheriff in, wondering if this was an official visit or just curiosity. Coffee? Jake offered. Sure. Sheriff Williams sat down at the kitchen table and noticed the adoption papers immediately. So it's true. You're trying to adopt those Thompson twins. Trying being the key word. Mind if I ask why? Jake poured 2 cups of coffee and sat down across from the sheriff. Williams had been a friend of his father's, had known Jake since he was a kid. If anyone in town understood him, it was probably this man. Honestly, I don't know. I saw them sitting on that bench, heard they might be separated, and something just snapped inside me. Felt like I had to do something. And now? Now I'm filling out paperwork that asks me to explain why a hermit who's avoided people for 5 years suddenly wants to raise children. Sheriff Williams sipped his coffee thoughtfully. You know, your dad used to say you had the biggest heart of any kid he'd ever met. Said you brought home every stray animal you found, cried when you had to throw fish back that were too small to keep. That was a long time ago, was it? Because yesterday at the diner, I saw the same kid who used to fight bullies twice his size because they were picking on smaller kids. Jake looked up from his application. Mrs. Rodriguez called you, didn't she? She did. Asked me about your character, your history, whether I thought you'd be a good father. Want to know what I told her? Jake nodded. I told her that Jake Morrison was one of the most decent men I'd ever known, and that losing his wife nearly broke him but didn't change who he was inside. I told her that if you said you wanted those kids, then those kids needed you just as much as you needed them. Their uncle is flying in today. He wants custody. I heard. David Chun, right? I did some checking on him this morning. Jake raised an eyebrow. And clean record, good credit, stable job. But Jake, in 7 years since those kids' parents died, he's visited them exactly 4 times. Christmas 2 years ago was the last time. Their grandmother mentioned it to me once, said the kids barely knew him. Will that matter to the courts? It depends on the judge, but it might matter to the kids, and sometimes that's what really counts. After Sheriff Williams left, Jake felt a little more confident about finishing the application. He wrote about Linda's death and how it taught him that love was worth the risk of loss. He wrote about the mountains and how they'd taught him patience and resilience. He wrote about seeing Riley and Tyler and remembering what it felt like to want to protect someone. At 1:30, his phone rang again. Mrs. Rodriguez sounded stressed. Jake, I need a favor. David Chun wants to take the children to lunch, just the 3 of them. I can't legally stop him, but I'm not comfortable with it either. They've never been alone with him, and they're already anxious about meeting him. What can I do? Would you be willing to be nearby? Not interfering, just available if something goes wrong. Of course. They're meeting at Maggie's Diner at 2. Just sit at a different table, order some food, and keep an eye on things. Jake was at the diner by 1:50, sitting in his usual corner booth with a clear view of the whole restaurant. At exactly 2 o'clock, Mrs. Rodriguez arrived with Riley and Tyler. Both kids looked nervous. Dressed in their best clothes and holding hands tightly, David Chun arrived 5 minutes later. He was everything Jake wasn't: tall, well-dressed, confident. He had the kind of smile that probably worked well in business meetings but looked forced when he knelt down to greet his niece and nephew. Riley, Tyler, look how big you've gotten. The kids exchanged glances but didn't let go of each other's hands. Riley managed a small, "Hi, Uncle David," while Tyler just nodded. Jake couldn't hear their conversation from across the restaurant, but he could read body language. David was trying hard, asking questions and showing them pictures on his phone. But the kids remained stiff and formal, answering politely but without enthusiasm. 20 minutes into lunch, Tyler excused himself to go to the bathroom. When he didn't return after 5 minutes, Riley started looking worried. She whispered something to her uncle, who waved dismissively and kept talking. Jake got up and walked to the back of the restaurant. He found Tyler sitting on the floor outside the bathroom, crying quietly. "Hey there," Jake said softly, kneeling down. "You okay?" Tyler looked up with red-rimmed eyes. "He doesn't remember us. He keeps calling Riley by the wrong name, and he doesn't know that I don't like mustard or that Riley is scared of loud noises. He's nice, but he doesn't know us." "That's hard," Jake said. "Want me to walk back with you?" Tyler nodded and took Jake's offered hand. When they returned to the table, Riley's face lit up with relief. "Jake," she said, forgetting to be polite. "You came back." David Chun looked confused. "I'm sorry, do we know you?" "This is Jake," Riley said before anyone else could answer. "He's the one who lives in the quiet place. He has books and a stream, and he knows about being sad." David's expression shifted as he realized who Jake was. The mountain man who wants to adopt my niece and nephew." "Just wanted to make sure Tyler was okay," Jake said carefully. He seemed upset. "He's fine, just nervous about meeting his uncle. Aren't you, buddy?" Tyler looked at Jake, then at his uncle, then down at his plate. "I guess—" Jake started to leave, but Riley's voice stopped him. "Will you sit with us, please?" David Chun's smile got tighter. "That's not really appropriate, Riley. This is family time." "But you don't feel like family," Tyler said quietly. "You feel like a stranger who knows our names." The words hung in the air like smoke. David's face flushed red, and Jake could see him struggling to maintain his composure. "Tyler, that's not a nice thing to say," David said. "I'm your father's brother. We're family whether you remember me or not." "Family takes care of each other," Riley said, her voice getting stronger. Grandma said family is the people who show up when you need them most. 3 months later, Jake's cabin looked completely different. What used to be a quiet refuge for one lonely man had become a real home. The main room now had 2 small beds tucked into cozy corners, each decorated with handmade quilts that Maggie from the diner had sewn. Riley's bed was covered with books and stuffed animals, while Tyler's had his collection of smooth river rocks arranged carefully on a wooden shelf Jake had built. The adoption process was moving slower than anyone had hoped. David Sheehan had filed a formal custody claim, which meant everything had to go through the courts. There were more interviews, more home visits, and more paperwork than Jake had ever imagined possible. But Mrs. Rodriguez had convinced the judge to let the twins stay with Jake temporarily while the case was being decided. Supervised placement, she called it. Jake didn't care what they called it as long as Riley and Tyler were with him. The changes hadn't been easy. Jake was learning that 8-year-old kids required a lot more than food and shelter. They needed routines, bedtime stories, help with homework, and someone to check for monsters under the bed. They needed hugs when they were sad, boundaries when they tested limits, and patience when grief hit them like unexpected storms. The first few weeks had been the hardest. Tyler barely spoke above a whisper, and Riley tried so hard to be perfect that Jake worried she might break from the pressure. Both kids tiptoed around the cabin like they were afraid of taking up too much space, afraid of being too much trouble. But slowly, things began to change. Riley discovered that Jake's bookshelf was full of adventure stories, and she started reading to Tyler every night before bed. Tyler found out that Jake knew the names of every bird that visited their mountain, and he began keeping a journal of all the different species he spotted. Both kids learned that Jake's gruff exterior hid a man who would drive 30 miles to town, just because Riley mentioned she missed ice cream, or spend hours teaching Tyler how to whittle because the boy showed interest in his pocket knife. The breakthrough came during their first real thunderstorm together. Jake woke up around midnight to the sound of thunder rolling across the mountains. The storm had moved in fast, the way they sometimes did in the high country. Lightning lit up the cabin windows, and rain drummed hard against the metal roof. He was getting up to check the windows when he heard it, a small, frightened cry from Tyler's bed. Jake grabbed a flashlight and made his way across the dark room, finding both kids huddled together in Tyler's narrow bed. "Hey there," Jake said softly, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Storm woke you up?" Riley nodded, her arm wrapped protectively around her brother. "Tyler doesn't like thunder. It reminds him of the night Grandma went to the hospital." Jake's heart clenched. He'd learned bits and pieces of their story over the past few months, but the kids still carried so much pain they couldn't put into words. "Want to tell me about that night?" Jake asked. Tyler's voice was barely a whisper. "There was a big storm. Grandma said she didn't feel good, and then she fell down in the kitchen. The ambulance was really loud, and the lights were flashing, and everything was scary." "That sounds terrifying," Jake said. "No wonder storms make you nervous." Another crash of thunder made Tyler flinch and burrow deeper into his sister's arms. Riley was trying to be brave, but Jake could see she was scared too. "You know what?" Jake said. "When I was a kid, my dad taught me something about thunderstorms." "Want me to show you?" Both kids nodded. Jake went to the kitchen and came back with 3 cups of hot chocolate and a handful of marshmallows. He pulled 2 chairs up to the big window that faced the valley and settled the kids on either side of him. "Now watch," he said as lightning flashed across the sky. "Count with me. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi." Thunder rumbled in the distance. "The storm is 3 miles away," Jake explained. "Lightning always comes before thunder because light travels faster than sound. So we can tell how far away the lightning is by counting." They sat together watching the storm, counting the seconds between lightning and thunder, tracking its path across the mountains. Jake told them stories about the summer storms of his childhood, how he and his dad used to sit on their front porch and watch nature's light show. "My dad said storms were just the sky's way of cleaning itself," Jake said. "Getting rid of all the old, stale air and bringing in something fresh and new." "Like crying?" Riley asked, exactly like crying. Sometimes you need a good storm to wash things clean. Tyler had been quiet during this conversation, but now he spoke up. Jake, what happened to your dad? He died when I was grown up. Heart attack. Just like your grandma, it was very sudden. Were you scared? Terrified. I didn't know how to live without him. He taught me everything I knew about being a man, about taking care of people I loved. Is that why you live alone up here? Riley asked with the directness that only children possess. Jake was quiet for a moment, watching the storm move further. Away, partly. I was sad and angry and scared of losing anyone else I cared about. So I decided it was safer to not care about anyone. But you care about us, Tyler said. Yeah, Jake said, surprised by how easily the truth came out. I do care. About you a lot, even though it's scary? Riley asked. Especially because it's scary. The best things in life are usually a little scary. They finished their hot chocolate in comfortable silence, watching the storm fade into distant flickers. Tyler's head grew heavy against Jake's shoulder, and his breathing deepened as he fell asleep. Jake? Riley whispered. Yeah? Do you think Grandma would like you? Jake thought about the woman who had raised these two amazing kids, who had taught them to be brave and kind and loyal. I hope so. I think she'd be happy that you two found someone who wants to take care of you. She always said family isn't just about blood. She said family is about people who choose to love you every day. Your grandma was a smart lady. Riley was quiet for so long that Jake thought she'd fallen asleep. But then she spoke again, her voice small and uncertain. Jake, are you going to be our family? For real? The question hit Jake like a physical blow. These kids had been with him for 3 months, but they still weren't sure if he was going to stay. How many people had they lost? How many promises had been broken? Yes, Jake said firmly. I'm going to be your family for real. No matter what happens with the lawyers and the courts and your uncle, I'm not going anywhere. You're stuck with me. Riley snuggled closer to his side. Good, I was hoping you'd say that. Jake carefully lifted Tyler and carried him to his own bed, tucking the blankets around him. The boy mumbled something in his sleep but didn't wake up. Riley climbed into her own bed and pulled her favorite stuffed bear close. Good night, Jake, she said. Good night, Riley. Jake was almost back to his own room when Tyler's voice stopped him. Papa? The word hung in the air like a prayer. Jake turned around slowly, hardly daring to believe what he'd heard. Tyler was sitting up in bed, looking confused and half asleep. Papa, I had a bad dream. Can you check for monsters? Jake's throat felt tight as he walked back to Tyler's bed. The boy had never called him Papa before. Had never called him anything but Jake. But here he was, in the middle of the night, reaching for comfort in the most natural way possible. Of course I can check for monsters, Jake said, his voice rougher than usual. He made a show of looking under the bed, in the closet, behind the curtains. All clear, he announced. No monsters in here. Just me and Riley, and we're pretty good at keeping monsters away. Tyler lay back down, already halfway back to sleep. Thanks, Papa. There it was again. That word that Jake had never thought he'd hear, had never dared to hope for. Papa, not Dad, not Father, but Papa, the name a sleepy 8-year-old chose when he needed someone to chase away the monsters. Jake sat on the edge of Tyler's bed until the boy's breathing evened out again. Across the room, he could hear Riley's soft snores. His kids? His family? The family he'd never planned on having, the one that had found him when he wasn't even looking. The next morning, Tyler didn't seem to remember calling Jake Papa. He was back to his usual quiet politeness, helping with breakfast and thanking Jake for everything. But Riley had heard it too, and Jake caught her smiling to herself several times throughout the day. It happened again 2 weeks later. Tyler fell off his bike and scraped his knee, and the first word out of his mouth was Papa, as he ran to Jake for comfort. This time, Tyler seemed to realize what he'd said, and his face turned red with embarrassment. I mean, Jake, he said quickly. Sorry. Hey, Jake knelt down to clean the scrape. You can call me whatever feels right. To you, I don't mind. Really? Really. Papa is a pretty good name for someone who loves you. Tyler smiled through his tears. Okay, Papa. From that day forward, it became natural. Not forced or awkward, but like something that had always been meant to happen. Riley started using it too, though she added her own twist. Papa Bear, she called him one morning when he was making pancakes. Like in the story, but nicer. Papa Bear? Jake raised an eyebrow. You're big and strong like a bear, but you're gentle and you take care of us, plus you live in the woods. It fits? And somehow it did fit. Jake Morrison, the mountain hermit who had sworn off human connection, had become Papa Bear to two kids who needed him as much as he needed them. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, just as Jake was packing lunches for Riley and Tyler's school day. The official seal of the family court made his stomach drop before he even opened it. He waited until the kids were on the school bus, before tearing it open with shaking hands. Motion to contest adoption filed by David Chun and legal representative. The words blurred together as Jake read. David Chun wasn't just claiming custody anymore. He was actively fighting the adoption. And he'd hired a lawyer. A good one. From the looks of the expensive letterhead, Jake's phone rang before he could finish reading. Mrs. Rodriguez sounded tired and stressed. You got the letter, she said. What does this mean? It means David Chun is serious about this. His lawyer is claiming you're an unfit guardian based on your history of depression, your isolation, and what they're calling reckless endangerment for letting the children live so far from medical facilities. Jake felt anger rise in his chest. Reckless endangerment? They have access to everything they need. I drive them to school every day, to doctor appointments, to friends' houses. I know that, Jake, but his lawyer is painting a picture of two vulnerable children being kept away from proper civilization by a man who can't handle his own emotional problems. What about what the kids want? What about their therapist's reports? They're doing better here than they ever have. That's what we'll argue in court. But Jake, I have to be honest with you. David Chun's lawyer has found something else. Jake's blood went cold. What? Your wife's death. They have the police report, the insurance claim, everything. They're going to argue that you were suicidal after the accident and that you moved to the mountains to isolate yourself from mental health treatment. Jake sat down hard in his kitchen chair. He'd known this day might come, but hearing it laid out so clinically made it real in a way that terrified him. Was I suicidal? He asked quietly. Maybe, I don't know. I just wanted the pain to stop. Jake, listen to me. That was 5 years ago? You're a completely different person now. Anyone who spends 5 minutes with you and the kids can see that. But the courts don't always see what's obvious to the rest of us. After Mrs. Rodriguez hung up, Jake sat staring at the letter until his coffee went cold. 5 years ago, he'd thought nothing could hurt worse than losing Linda. He'd been wrong. The thought of losing Riley and Tyler felt like dying all over again. When the kids got home from school that afternoon, they could tell something was wrong. Jake tried to act normal, helping with homework and making dinner, but Riley kept shooting him worried glances. Papa Bear, she said during dinner, you look sad. Did something bad happen? Jake looked at these two kids who'd brought his heart back to life and knew he couldn't lie to them. They'd already survived too much uncertainty to be kept in the dark now. Uncle David's lawyer sent some papers today. They're still trying to take you away from here. Tyler's fork clattered against his plate. But we don't want to go. We told them that. I know, buddy. Sometimes what kids want doesn't matter as much as it should. Riley's jaw set in the stubborn way Jake had learned to recognize. Then we'll just tell them again, louder this time. It's not that simple, sweetheart. Uncle David says he can give you things I can't. A big house, fancy schools, lots of opportunities. We don't want a big house, Tyler said firmly. We want our home. And we don't want opportunities, Riley added. We want you. Jake's throat felt tight. What if the judge doesn't see it that way? Both kids were quiet for a moment. Then Riley spoke up, her voice small but determined. Then we'll run away. Tyler and me will hide in the mountains until they give up looking for us. Riley, you can't. Yes, we can. You taught us how to find water and build shelters and which berries are safe to eat. We could live up there until we're old enough to decide for ourselves. Jake looked at his 8-year-old daughter, because that's what she was, regardless of what any court said, and saw a fierce determination that reminded him of wild animals protecting their young. Listen to me, both of you. Running away isn't the answer. If we're going to fight this, we're going to do it the right way. How? Tyler asked. By showing everyone what they already know. That we're a family, that this is where you belong. That love matters more than lawyers and paperwork. The court hearing was scheduled for the following Monday. Jake spent the weekend preparing, reviewing documents with his lawyer, a kind woman named Patricia Wells, who worked mostly with family cases. She'd taken Jake's case at a reduced rate because, as she put it, sometimes the system needs a reminder about what family really means. Sunday night, Jake couldn't sleep. He stood at his bedroom window, looking out at the mountains that had been his refuge for so long. Tomorrow, strangers would decide whether Riley and Tyler could continue calling this place home. A soft knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. "Papa?" Tyler's voice was barely a whisper. "Can I sleep in your room tonight?" "I keep having bad dreams about moving away." "Of course, buddy." Tyler climbed into the big bed, and within minutes Riley appeared too. "I heard voices," she said. "And I don't want to be alone either." They lay there in the dark, the three of them, listening to the wind in the pine trees and the distant call of an owl. Jake thought about how this had become the most natural thing in the world, these two kids seeking comfort from him, trusting him to keep them safe. "Papa?" Riley's voice was sleepy. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that you're the best dad we could have asked for." "Even though I don't know how to braid hair or help with girl problems?" Jake asked. "You're learning. And you never make us feel bad for being sad about Grandma." Tyler snuggled closer. "And you taught us that it's okay to be scared sometimes. As long as you don't let being scared stop you from caring about people." Jake held his kids close and wondered how 2 8-year-olds had become wise enough to teach him about courage. Monday morning arrived gray and cold. Jake dressed in his only suit, a black one he'd worn to Linda's funeral and hadn't touched since. Riley insisted on wearing her best dress, the blue one with flowers that her grandmother had bought her. Tyler wore the button-down shirt Jake had gotten him for school pictures. "We look like a real family," Riley announced, checking their reflection in the hallway mirror. "We are a real family," Jake said. "No matter what anyone else says." The courthouse was intimidating, all marble columns and echoing hallways. David Chun was already there with his lawyer, a sharp-faced woman in an expensive suit who looked like she ate family court judges for breakfast. Jake's stomach dropped when he saw them. David looked successful and confident, everything a judge would expect from a guardian. Next to him, Jake felt like exactly what David's lawyer claimed. He was a mountain hermit in an ill-fitting suit, but then Riley slipped her hand into his, and Tyler pressed close to his other side, and Jake remembered why he was here. Not to prove he was perfect, but to prove he was theirs. Mrs. Rodriguez approached with a small army of supporters. Sheriff Williams in his dress uniform, Maggie from the diner, Bill from the auto shop, Dr. Peterson, the family doctor who'd been treating the kids, even Principal Martinez from the elementary school. Half the town showed up, Mrs. Rodriguez sighed quietly. "When word got out about the hearing, people started calling me, asking how they could help." Jake stared at the group of people who'd come to support him. These were folks he'd barely spoken to in 5 years, people he'd actively avoided during his hermit phase. Yet here they were, taking time out of their day to speak for him and the kids. The hearing began with David Chun's lawyer painting Jake as an unstable recluse who'd impulsively decided to adopt children he couldn't properly care for. She presented documents about his isolation after Linda's death, his lack of parenting experience, and the remote and potentially dangerous location of his cabin. "Your Honor," she said, "Mr. Morrison may mean well, but good intentions don't qualify someone to raise traumatized children. These kids need professional support, educational opportunities, and access to mental health services that simply aren't available in the middle of nowhere." Jake's lawyer responded by calling Mrs. Rodriguez to the stand. The social worker testified about the kids' remarkable progress, their attachment to Jake, and the stability they'd found in his care. In 15 years of social work, she said, I've rarely seen children recover from trauma as quickly and completely as Riley and Tyler have in Mr. Morrison's home. Sheriff Williams testified about Jake's character, about the man who'd risked his own safety countless times to rescue lost hikers and who'd become a pillar of their small community. Dr. Peterson talked about the children's improved health and happiness. Principal Martinez described how they'd gone from withdrawn and fearful to confident and engaged students, but the most powerful testimony came from an unexpected source. Maggie from the diner took the stand and looked directly at the judge. Your Honor, I've known Jake Morrison since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. I watched him shut down after his wife died, saw him disappear into those mountains like a wounded animal. For 5 years, I worried that boy was just waiting to die up there. She paused, glancing at Jake and the kids. But then these children came into his life, and I watched him come back to the land of the living. I've seen him in my diner with Riley and Tyler teaching. 1 year later, Jake stood on his front porch watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold and orange. The same view he'd stared at for years, but everything had changed. The silence that used to feel empty now felt peaceful. The isolation that used to protect him now felt like freedom. Behind him, he could hear Riley and Tyler getting ready for school. Their voices carried through the cabin, Riley reading her book report out loud while Tyler searched for his missing sneaker. Normal. Family sounds that Jake never got tired of hearing. Papa Bear, Riley called from inside. Tyler can't find his shoe again. Did you check under your bed? Jake called back, smiling. Tyler had a habit of kicking off his shoes while doing homework and never remembering where they landed. Found it! Tyler's voice was triumphant. It was in my backpack. Jake shook his head. 9-year-olds had their own logic when it came to organization. The cabin itself looked completely different now. What started as emergency modifications had become a real home renovation. Jake had built a proper second bedroom in what used to be his workshop, complete with 2 windows that looked out over the valley. The main room now had a dining table where they ate meals together every night and did homework every afternoon. Riley's corner was organized chaos. Books stacked everywhere, art supplies scattered across a small desk, and photos of their grandmother displayed on floating shelves Jake had installed. Tyler's space was neat and orderly, with his rock collection arranged by size and color, his bird-watching journal on the knitstand, and his whittling projects displayed on a special shelf. The biggest change was in the kitchen. Jake had learned to cook real meals, not just the basic survival food he'd lived on for years. Riley had insisted on teaching him their grandmother's spaghetti recipe, and Tyler had shown him how to make proper pancakes instead of the lumpy disasters Jake used to produce. We're ready, Riley announced, bouncing into the kitchen with her backpack. She'd grown 3 inches in the past year and lost 2 teeth, giving her a gap-toothed grin that made Jake's heart squeeze every time he saw it. Tyler followed more quietly, as was his way. He'd gained confidence over the year, but was still the thoughtful observer of the family. His latest obsession was photography, and he carried an old camera Jake had found at a garage sale, documenting everything from sunrise over the mountains to the family of deer that visited their yard. Don't forget your permission slips, Jake sighed, handing them each a folded paper. And Riley, remember you have soccer practice after school. I know, Papa Bear. You've only reminded me 10 times this week. Jake had been nervous about Riley joining the soccer team. It meant driving down the mountain twice a week for practices and games, meant standing on sidelines with other parents, meant being part of a community in ways he'd avoided for years. But watching Riley's face light up when she scored her first goal had made every awkward conversation with other parents worth it. Tyler preferred individual activities. He'd joined the nature club at school and had become something of a celebrity among his classmates for his ability to identify any bird call and track animal movements. His teacher said he had a gift for observation that most adults never developed. The drive to school had become Jake's favorite part of the day. 20 miles of winding mountain road that gave them time to talk about everything and nothing. Riley usually dominated the conversation, telling elaborate stories about her friends or her latest book. Tyler would add quiet observations or ask questions that showed he'd been listening to everything. "Papa Bear," Riley said as they drove through town, "Mrs. Henderson asked if you'd come talk to our class about mountain safety." Jake felt the familiar flutter of nervousness that came with being the center of attention. "What did you tell her?" "That you're the best mountain guide in Colorado, and you know everything about surviving in the wilderness." "Please, it would be so cool to have my dad come to school." "My dad," the word still caught Jake off guard sometimes. "Not Papa or Papa Bear, but Dad?" The title Riley used when she was proud of him, when she wanted her friends to know he belonged to her. "I'll think about it," Jake said, which they all knew meant yes after dropping the kids at school. Jake drove to his meeting with Mrs. Rodriguez. These monthly check-ins were still required as part of the adoption process, but they'd become more like visits with an old friend than official social services appointments. "How are things going?" she asked, settling into her chair with a cup of coffee. "Good, really good. Riley's doing great in school, and Tyler's teacher says he's one of the most creative writers in his class. And you? How are you adjusting to full-time parenting?" Jake thought about it. A year ago, he couldn't have imagined being responsible for two children's complete well-being. Now he couldn't imagine his life without them. "Some days I still feel like I'm making it up as I go along," he admitted. "But I think that's normal, right? Even parents who plan for kids don't know what they're doing half the time. Double quotes, Mrs. Rodriguez smiled. "That's the most honest thing any parent has ever said to me. The fact that you worry about doing it right means you probably are." She pulled out a folder and handed it to Jake. "I have something for you." The final adoption papers came through. It's official now. Riley and Tyler Morrison are legally your children. Jake stared at the papers, seeing their names typed in official font. Morrison. They shared his name now, his family name. Linda would have loved them, he thought. She would have been the kind of mother who taught Riley to braid her hair and helped Tyler organize his collections. "There's something else," Mrs. Rodriguez said. "I got a call from David Chun's lawyer yesterday." Jake's stomach clenched. "What now?" He's dropping his appeal. "David Chun has decided not to pursue custody any further." Relief flooded through Jake. So fast it made him dizzy. What changed his mind? Apparently he's been offered a position in Tokyo, 2-year contract, lots of travel. He finally realized that what he thought he wanted and what he could actually provide were two different things. Jake thought about the man who'd fought so hard for custody of kids he barely knew. Maybe David Chun wasn't a bad person, just someone who'd confused obligation with love, family duty with genuine care. "How are the kids doing with everything?" "Really?" Jake considered the question seriously. "They still have hard days. Riley sometimes gets quiet when we pass their grandmother's old house. Tyler still has nightmares occasionally, but they're healing. They laugh more than they cry now, and they've stopped asking if I'm going to change my mind about keeping them." "And their therapy sessions?" "Dr. Williams says they're doing remarkably well." Riley's starting to talk about her parents, not just their death, but happy memories from when they were babies. Tyler's anxiety about being separated from Riley has gotten much better. After leaving Mrs. Rodriguez's office, Jake stopped by the hardware store to pick up supplies for his latest project. He was building a treehouse for the kids, something he'd been planning since summer. Riley had drawn detailed blueprints, and Tyler had calculated exactly which tree branches could support the weight. "Jake," Bill from the auto shop waved him over. "Heard Riley scored 2 goals in yesterday's game?" "3 goals, Jake corrected with pride. "Kid's got a natural talent." "And Tyler's nature photos are going to be in the county fair, right?" Jake nodded. Tyler's photographs of local wildlife had impressed everyone who saw them. The boy had an eye for capturing moments that adults missed: a deer drinking from the stream at sunrise, a hawk perched on their fence post, the twins' shadows as they explored the forest. "You've got good kids there, Jake. The whole town's proud of how you've all turned out." It still surprised Jake to hear things like that. For so long, he'd thought of himself as the town hermit, the crazy mountain man people talked about but avoided. Now he was just Jake Morrison, single dad to two great kids who happened to live up in the mountains. The afternoon pickup from school was always chaotic. Riley would burst out of the building full of energy and stories about her day. Tyler would emerge more quietly, usually with some interesting fact he'd learned or a question about something that had puzzled him. "Papa Bear?" Riley threw herself into his arms like she hadn't seen him in weeks instead of hours. "Guess what? I got picked for the advanced reading group. That's fantastic, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you." Tyler appeared with a smile on his face, which meant something good had happened. "I got an A on my science project about bird migration patterns." "Both my kids are geniuses," Jake said, ruffling Tyler's hair. "Should we celebrate with ice cream?" "Yes," Riley shouted, then caught herself. "I mean, that would be nice." "Think." "You," Jake laughed. Mrs. Rodriguez had been working with Riley on using her inside voice and remembering her manners. It was a work in progress. That evening, after homework was done and dinner was finished, the three of them sat on the front porch watching the stars come out. This had become their favorite time of day, when the mountain air was cool and the world was quiet enough to hear their own thoughts. "Papa Bear," Riley said, leaning against his shoulder, "do you think Grandma knows we're happy?" It was the kind of question that would have terrified Jake a year ago. Talking about death and loss and the mysterious things that happened after people died